And here it is, the finished fugasse, ready to be eaten. My favorite section here is the corner.
Hi, my name is Maurizio Leo and I'm the resident bread baker here at Food 52, and I'm here today in my kitchen in Albuquerque, New Mexico to show you guys how to make my sourdough fougasse. And what I love about this sourdough fougasse is the shape is something different. It's, I always have a loaf or two of bread on the dinner table, but this shape is something a little bit more unique and something you might not see typically, and I think that makes it fun. And all that aside, it's absolutely delicious and it's pretty easy to put together. It doesn't take too much time during the day, and by the end of the late afternoon you have a really awesome set of bread that will please just about everybody.
Okay, now I'm going to add my ripe sourdough starter. You can see it's really bubbly and active and well broken down. I'm just going to scoop it into my mixing bowl with the flour. And next I'll add in the called for water, then lock my bowl into the mixer, add the salt, and turn the mixer up to speed 1 and mix until it's incorporated. Okay, everything is incorporated now, and we'll let this dough rest for 10 minutes. Okay, so it's been the 10-minute rest, and after that I gave it another 3 to 4 minutes of mixing on speed 2 here on my KitchenAid mixer. And you can see now the dough is quite a bit smoother, and if you kind of tug on it, it's much stronger. It's not fully developed by any means. You can not get a full window pane test, but you can see how strong it is and how long it takes for it to shred apart when pulling. And if I mix for another couple seconds here, you can see quite how quickly the dough balls up around the dough hook. So to me, this is a good sign that we've got enough development to get that olive oil in. We'll drizzle in the olive oil as we have the mixer set to speed 1 and take our time with this. We don't want to rush it. We'll just drizzle it in slowly until the olive oil is completely absorbed into the dough. I poured in all of the olive oil, but it's still not quite absorbed into the dough. So I'm going to keep mixing on speed 1, maybe toggle up to speed 2 here and there until the oil is completely absorbed. Okay, after another 3 minutes or so, the oil looks really well absorbed into the dough. You can see it's a soft dough, but it's pretty strong. It's clumped up around the hook there in the middle. And I'll turn it on here just to speed 1 just to show you how strong the dough is even with all that oil added. Okay, so at this point we'll take the dough out of the bowl and we'll transfer it over to a bulk fermentation container just to keep it during that 3-hour rise. And it's looking pretty good. And something I always do is we'll take the temperature of the dough, and we're looking at 24 degrees Celsius, so pretty much spot on. Now we'll cover our dough with some reusable plastic or a wet towel, and we'll set a timer for 30 minutes, come back and give it its first set of stretch and folds. Okay, it's been 30 minutes, and now we'll give this dough its first set of stretch and folds. I just have a bowl of water here, dip my hands in, help release the dough from the sides. And I like to pick up one side, fold it over, rotate, repeat, and for the last 2, I kind of pick it up and tuck it under like this. That's it. Cover it back up, set another timer for 30 minutes, and repeat. If I can get it covered, that is. Okay, it's been 3 hours, and you can see now the dough has risen quite a bit in my container. You can see there's some bubbles on the sides and top, and I always like to look for this edge right here. You can kind of see how it's doming down and showing that there was a lot of upward rise during the bulk fermentation. So now what I'll do is I'll scrape the dough out onto my work surface and divide it equally into two and pre-shape. For pre-shaping, I'm just using my silicone spatula to scrape the dough out, and I like to use a little bowl of water to keep my hand that's not holding the spatula a little wet so that the dough doesn't stick. I'll take my bench knife, put a little water on that, and my other hand. In my case, I'm left-handed, so I'm keeping my right hand wet. I'll divide this dough right in half, or as close as I can get it. Keep my blade close to the work surface and kind of push while using my wet hand to tuck the dough underneath as I'm turning it and tightening it up. Not excessively tightening it here, I'm just getting it into a rough round shape, and that's really it. This dough is pretty strong, so I don't need any more than that. And I'll repeat for the second one. Push and tuck, turn, push and tuck. And in the end, I end up with two pre-shaped rounds, and you can see there's some good activity in that dough. Through bulk fermentation, there's plenty of bubbles on the surface and it's plenty strong. So now we'll let the dough rest here for about 30 minutes to relax, to allow an easier time for rolling it out onto its baking sheet. Okay, it's been 30 minutes and the dough has relaxed. You can see that it's spread out some. They're now touching. And I like to leave the dough exposed to air during that rest. It gives it a little bit of a dry skin on the outside, which makes handling it easier, but to that end, we'll also use just some regular white flour on our hands to make sure that the dough is not sticking as we pick it up. And I have a piece of parchment paper here cut to fit a half baking sheet. And I like to spread some olive oil on the sheet, just so that when we put the dough on here, it doesn't stick. And I know parchment paper is already kind of non-stick, but we want to make sure that we can lift it up pretty easily. An alternative to oil here would be white flour if you wanted to, or something like cornmeal, or even semolina would be great. All right, and I'll repeat this for the second piece of parchment paper, and then we'll move the dough over. Okay, I have my two pieces of parchment greased with some olive oil. And I also have my rolling dowel here. It's just any old rolling pin will work. And I will lightly dust this rested round right here. My hands. Use my bench knife to loosen the edges. Pull it up in my hands and just drop it right into the middle, just like that. And I'll repeat this for the other one. Okay, now grab your rolling pin and just gently roll it out. You don't need to push hard. We don't want to completely degas the dough here. That's going to happen to some degree, but we don't want to lean down on the dough and excessively push it. This is kind of our pre-shape here. We're really just trying to get it into a rough triangle shape, and really this can be any shape you want. If you want to make a large rectangular fugasse, you can totally do that. I kind of like the traditional triangle. And from here you can try to even this out a little bit. Pull out the corners. Don't have to do it to the edges at this point. We kind of want to keep it inward because the next step will be cutting and stretching further. Working with one at a time, just kind of drag it onto your baking sheet like this. That'll be where we do the final cutting, final shaping, and topping. And I like to cover my baking sheet with these reusable plastic bags. Well, you can use really anything to keep the draft off because these are going to proof now for an hour and a half. And keeping it covered helps prevent a skin from forming on the outside. What I do here, a little trick, is put it inside my bag and kind of puff it up with air so that it doesn't come in contact with the dough for too long. So puff it up, pleat the bag, and tuck it under like that. And then you can leave it here for an hour and a half. So it's been about an hour and a half, and I've uncovered my dough here, and you can see it's relaxed out a little bit. It's quite puffy and pretty well risen now. See some bubbles at the sides and on top. And now's the fun part. Now we get to cut and shape it out a little bit. So a few tools. I use a pastry cutter. I like obviously not the fluted edge side, but the flat edge side we'll use to cut into the dough as we spread it. And then after we cut and spread, I like to spread on a mixture of herbs de Provence and olive oil that I've left to sit overnight, and has a pretty amazing aroma to it. This is really a mixture of, I think, savory, thyme, rosemary, tarragon, lavender. And then I have a pastry brush to spread that on top. Oh, and last but not least, some kosher sea salt for final dusting. I like to make 2 or 3 vertical cuts here in the middle, and then some diagonals coming out so that this more or less resembles a large leaf shape. So start by cutting in and doing a vertical cut, and while you're doing that, pull it apart a little bit to make sure that the cut doesn't seal back up. Do this. And this doesn't have to be perfect. Just try not to smush down into the dough too hard, because if you do that, then that area won't rise as much. But honestly, that's not really a big problem because that area will just be a little bit more crispy, which is also quite nice. So don't pull and spread at this point all the way to the edges, because those are just the center cuts. Next will be the bottom ones. I should say the bottom and the sides. So from there, we're gonna do one here and stretch. One here and stretch. There. So at this point, it's gonna look kind of stretched and a little silly, but hey, that's part of the fun of all this. And once this thing bakes, all these areas are gonna puff up quite a bit, so don't worry about any areas that are a little bit more flat. And like I said, those areas actually become quite delicious because that's where the olive oil kind of pools up and tastes pretty awesome. So now grab your pastry brush and your olive oil with herbs, and if you don't want to have herbs inside, you can leave those out, and do a good brush of the olive oil all over. Now that I've got that, I like to add a few more herbs to the top. So the oil is kind of absorbed a lot of the flavor of these herbs since it's marinated overnight, but I like to add a little more. And even though this may look like it's quite a dusting of herbs, some of them will brush off during baking, and afterwards we'll kind of dot this fugasse with a little bit more olive oil, and so some more will fall off. So I like to be pretty liberal with it at this point. And honestly, I don't think you can have too many of these because they just taste awesome. All right, next up is some pretty coarse grained sea salt. And this just adds a pop of flavor as you're eating it. Again, I'm a little bit heavy-handed with this because the dough doesn't have a high salt content to start with, and some of the salt will brush off in baking and after the fact. Okay, that's it. Now this guy's gonna go into the oven. All right, so out of the oven, I like to just dot it a little bit more with some more olive oil, trying not to knock off too many of the herbs or the salt that's on top. And here it is, the finished fugasse, ready to be eaten. My favorite section here is the corner. You can hear how crunchy it is on these thinner spots, which is what I personally like. But in these thicker areas too, it's quite nice. It's a little bit softer on the inside, and you get a really nice contrast between the interior, which is quite nice and fluffy, and the kind of crispy areas on the side. And what I like to do is have a little plate of herbs and more olive oil and just kind of dip it in and go to town.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed making that sourdough fugasse with me, and I really hope you make it for your Thanksgiving meal, or any meal really. I guarantee if you make it once, you're gonna make it again. It's that good. And I hope that you have a great holiday season, and happy baking.